Should I waive my rights to a home inspection? I'm Betty Russo. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I'm here today with Sergio Angione of Housemaster, my go-to home inspector. Sergio, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So Sergio, before we talk about a buyer waiving their rights to a home inspection, let's cover what the main purpose is of a home inspection.
A home inspection is not a code inspection. So our function really is to check for functionality and safety issues throughout the home, make sure that things that are installed are working in good order and that there's no signs of any possible safety hazards. We walk the entire home on the outside and on the inside. We're looking for electrical issues. We open up the electrical panel, look for possible wiring issues. We check outlets. So again, those could be safety hazards. Things like the range not being properly installed in the kitchen where it can tip over. That would be a safety hazard that would come up on a home inspection. TPR valves, temperature pressure relief valves on boilers or water heaters that are either not installed or not installed correctly could be safety hazards. So things like that, things that are in the home functioning, but possibly either not installed correctly or just broke down.
So now I always tell my clients that it is your job, the inspector, to really dissect the whole entire house. But there's really no need for them to panic when they see the report, because again, it's your job to really let them know what they're buying. Can you expand on that? Because I know sometimes, and you're not an alarmist, which I love.
One of the benefits of a Housemaster home inspection is that we have a rating system that's satisfactory, fair, poor. So there are things that we're going to find wrong that are really maintenance driven, or sometimes just something is functioning, but it's just older and getting close to the end of its average lifespan. So instead of saying, hey, this is a really big problem, you got to change this, we'll let people know, look, it's in good order, it's working, but we're going to give it a fair rating because it could break down in the relatively near future. That could be a year, that could be through 3 years, but it is getting close to the end. So just to give the buyer a heads up that, hey, this piece of equipment may need some maintenance or some repairs in the future. If we see something that is more along the lines of broken down or possibly leaking, an active leak or a fire hazard, we talked about electrical before, so that we would rate poor because of the safety factor involved. Most homes are going to have things wrong. And it's just because no one maintains their home in prime condition, and even brand new construction sometimes has a couple of things that you may find that are not done correctly, or one of the contractors possibly overlooked something accidentally. So there's always going to be stuff that we're going to find. So buyers shouldn't panic when they see a report. One of the requirements that the state has of us licensed home inspectors is that we have to give our clients worst possible case scenarios. So when we find something wrong, we tell them the worst thing that can happen, and then we tell them what to do about it. So we're not trying to tell people that the house is breaking down, but we do have to let them know that, these things could develop if you don't do anything about what we happen to be finding at the time.
Now, you touched on something that brought another question to mind. Things in the home that are coming to the end of their life expectancy. What do you say to buyers about that? I know a lot of times I'll hear from buyers that, oh my gosh, that's so old, they need to replace that. We need to ask them to replace that. The seller is not obligated to replace something that is coming to the end of its life expectancy, but is not quite there yet. Am I right on that?
That's absolutely true. The whole inspection report, a home inspection is not a binding document. A home inspection is to give our clients as much information as we can about the home, and then they can decide if they want to negotiate on something or if they don't want to, if they want to fix something, if they don't want to. It's really up to them.
I do have to ask you, because I know that you do other type of inspections too, when it comes to, real estate transactions. And not every home inspector does that, but you do quite a bit. What other type of inspections do you offer?
Well, we try to give our clients inspection services as possible. So along with the structural home inspection, we do WDI, which is sometimes called a termite inspection. We do radon testing. We do underground oil tank scans. Sewer scopes, which are very becoming much more prevalent these days to do a sewer inspection. We can do mold testing. We can do pool inspections when they're operating in the summertime.
I didn't know that. Awesome.
Okay. Yeah. And we do, we also have an IR camera. So if need be, we can do an IR scan of areas of the home if a buyer would want to do that. We're also working on the new state licensing for lead inspections. And we're
Okay.
also working on the level 2 chimney inspections, which we should be able to do both of those things within the next few months.
That's fantastic. That's more than I actually even thought. What really stood out to me that you do is the oil tank sweep also.
We've been doing that about 7 or 8 years now.
I mean, a lot of times that's a separate inspector. So I love that you offer all of these different type of inspections. It makes it easier, for the buyer to just have you do everything rather than trying to, schedule all these different contractors. So awesome.
Yeah, it also reduces the amount of times they have to get back into the house. It makes it easier for the seller. We're not disturbing them as
Yeah.
many times either. So
Exactly. Okay. And better for the real estate agent too,
I'm
I mean,
sure.
I like to refer you. I know a lot of real estate agents that refer you to their clients, but it just makes sense all around. You can get it all done. When you hear a buyer that wants to, I mean, and I always advise against this. I would never ever tell anyone to do this, but when you hear of a buyer that says, I'm just going to waive my rights to my inspections, I don't think they quite understand what it is that they're actually offering. What is the first thing that would come to your mind if you ever hear a buyer say that?
Well, my concern is that the buyer typically waives the inspection because they want the seller to know that they're not going to come back and try to renegotiate a price or things like that. Our inspection is really geared toward information for the buyer. So the buyer can say, listen, I'm not going to debate or negotiate anything found in my inspection report, but I think the buyer should still be in a position where he knows what he's buying. He or she knows what he's buying. So they should have the home inspection on an informational purpose only, if that's the phrase they want to use. But we'll do the same home inspection. We'll give them all the information, and they've told the seller that they're not going to go back and renegotiate. Now, you have to talk to an attorney. There's different terms and things you have to do there, but just because you're having a home inspection doesn't mean you're going to go back and renegotiate. You just want to know as a buyer what condition that house is in so that I can plan as a buyer, I can plan my expenses and my budget over the next few years if I know that I have to make repairs.
Right.
It's never a good idea to not do a home inspection.
Never. But one thing people are doing, they are offering to waive any potential repair requests, with the exception of a few things, right? And you had mentioned hazardous, then structural, and environmental. So I think that's a little more reasonable of a thing to offer. Although I think everybody's doing it now, and it's just expected that you're not going to nitpick on the home inspection, that you're really only going to look for these big items. What would you consider? I know environmental, septic would fall under that category. What else would fall under environmental?
Well, I would think that your sewer pipe should be checked, and that's an environmental health hazard. If it's not working correctly, you can have stuff backing into your home, so that's never a good thing. Radon is something very important to do in the state of New Jersey. Termites, most mortgage companies require the termite certification, so the WDI also usually gets considered as an environmental issue, and an underground oil tank typically gets considered as an underground as an environmental issue. So those 4 things are key for environmental hazards. When you say structural, that's kind of up for interpretation. I mean, as a home inspector, a cracked rafter in a roof to me is structural. I've heard people say, well, it's not a big deal because it's only a relatively easy fix. And I agree it's an easy fix, but it's still a structural defect. So that's kind of a gray area. Foundation wall cracks are structural, but some are settlement cracks, some are not. So structural is a very vague word.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're saying that, because a lot of times buyers will say, we're not going to ask for anything, unless it's environmental, hazardous, structural. And then the report comes back and there's a whole slew of things on there that the buyer may believe to be structural. And the seller will say, but wait, you said you were not going to ask for that. That's not structural. So I never know how to interpret that. And I need to know, and everyone needs to know how to interpret what is structural, so they know when they waive their right to, you know, inspection requests regarding these items, like, how do they know what they're asking for?
It's, I mean, if you look at the specific definition of structural, then it would be anything involving the building, the home itself, foundation walls, floor beams, uh, roof trusses. That to me is structural. Most of the time, I believe, and I'm not sure, but I believe that when they say that, they're trying to eliminate the mechanicals, like the electrical system, the HVAC system, the water
Yes.
heater, the boiler. Those are things that wear out over time. So I can understand why they're saying that. But again, but it's an interpretation thing.
Right.
That's something that if you can be more clear when making your contract or when making your offer and saying, we're not going to come back on mechanicals. That's probably a more an easier way of defining what that means. So you can say, well, we're not going to worry about mechanicals. So we know we're not worrying about those. If I find a foundation crack that's a problem, then we know that's a structural defect. If I find a broken rafter in the attic, then we know that's a structural defect. If I tell you that the boiler is at the end of its life or the boiler has a leak, that's not structural.
Right.
So it's a little easier to define that way.
I'm glad that we're talking about this, because that was always my thought. Like, structural is the house,
The actual house.
the
Yeah.
actual house. And then I've seen, the major systems in the house like added into that category. And I'm like, I don't think so. It doesn't make sense, but
It's vague. When they just say structural, it's vague unless it's a little better defined.
okay. So we're going to have to work on defining it better then.
Because that would make life a lot easier.
It would.
Everybody.
A lot less confusion also. Your answer to the big question was, do not waive your rights to an inspection, even if the inspection is for informational purposes only. As a buyer, you need to have that inspection. And that's what I tell my clients all the time. But I thought it would be great for people to hear that from you as well.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to go, because you still, as a buyer, should be entitled to know what you're buying.
Exactly. Exactly. You also share really great tips. I see you getting on video all the time on social media. So where can our viewers find you?
SRA Home Inspections on Instagram. There's usually 1 or 2 videos a week of me finding either things wrong in the homes or actually finding things installed well in a home. And nice place to get some information from us.
Yeah, I love that you show those examples. So, and your website?
Sergio.Angione@housemaster.com.
Awesome. Awesome. So great. Thank you so much, Sergio, for joining me today and answering all these questions. This was awesome.
No, thank you for having me.
Yes. And we'll see you next time.